Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the incredible life of George Washington, America's first president and one of history's most influential leaders. This isn't just a story about a president. It's about a man who led a revolution, refused to become a king, and set the standard for democratic leadership that still inspires the world today. From his childhood on a Virginia plantation to becoming the father of his country, Washington's journey is filled with courage, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. So grab your coffee, hit that like button, and let's explore the fascinating life of George Washington from beginning to end. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, at Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He came from a moderately wealthy planting family. His father, Augustine Washington, was a tobacco planter who owned several plantations and enslaved people. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was Augustine's second wife and known for being a strong-willed, demanding woman. Young George was the eldest of 6 children from his father's second marriage, though he had 2 older half-brothers from his father's first marriage. Life on the plantation exposed him early to the realities of colonial Virginia society, including the institution of slavery that he would grapple with throughout his life. Tragedy struck early when George was just 11 years old. His father died suddenly in 1743. This event dramatically changed the course of his life. Unlike his older half-brothers who received education in England, George's formal schooling ended. He never attended college and was largely self-educated, learning mathematics, geography, and the classics at home. The death of his father also meant that George wouldn't inherit the main family estate. Instead, he received Ferry Farm and several enslaved workers. This forced him to think practically about his future from a young age. Washington showed an early aptitude for mathematics and map-making. At age 15, he went to live with his half-brother Lawrence at Mount Vernon, a beautiful estate on the Potomac River. Lawrence became a father figure and mentor, introducing George to Virginia's elite society and influential figures like the powerful Fairfax family. At age 16, George Washington found his first profession, land surveying. Through his connection with the Fairfax family, he joined a surveying party to the Shenandoah Valley in 1748. This wasn't just a job, it was an adventure into the American frontier. For 3 years, Washington worked as a professional surveyor, mapping out vast tracts of wilderness. He traveled through rugged terrain, encountered Native Americans, and learned survival skills that would prove invaluable later. This experience taught him about land values, frontier life, and the geography of the American colonies. The work was physically demanding but financially rewarding. Washington used his earnings wisely, purchasing his own land. By age 18, he had acquired almost 1,500 acres. This early business acumen would characterize his entire life. Washington was always shrewd about money and property. But personal tragedy struck again in 1752 when his beloved half-brother Lawrence died of tuberculosis. George inherited Mount Vernon, the estate that would become his lifelong home and the symbol of his legacy. In 1752, at age 20, Washington joined the Virginia militia as a major. He had no formal military training, but his size, he stood about 6 feet 2 inches, unusually tall for the era, his physical strength, and his natural leadership qualities made him stand out. His first major military assignment came in 1753 during the French and Indian War. Virginia's governor sent Washington on a dangerous mission to deliver a message to French forces in the Ohio Valley, warning them to leave British-claimed territory. Washington traveled through 500 miles of wilderness in harsh winter conditions, nearly drowning when his raft overturned in the icy Allegheny River. He returned a hero, and his journal of the expedition was published, making him famous throughout the colonies. In 1754, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, Washington led a military expedition back to the Ohio Valley. In a controversial incident at Jumonville Glen, Washington's forces ambushed a French scouting party, killing the French commander. This skirmish is considered by many historians to be one of the opening shots of the French and Indian War. However, Washington's early military career wasn't all glory. He was forced to surrender Fort Necessity to the French after a day-long battle. It was a humiliating defeat and the only time in his military career that Washington surrendered to an enemy. Despite this setback, Washington continued serving. He joined British General Edward Braddock's ill-fated expedition in 1755. When Braddock's forces were ambushed and decimated by French and Indian fighters, Washington showed remarkable courage. He had 2 horses shot out from under him and 4 bullets pierce his coat, yet he emerged unharmed, helping to organize the retreat and save surviving soldiers. His bravery earned him command of all Virginia militia forces at age 23, making him responsible for defending 300 miles of frontier with limited resources. In 1758, frustrated with British military command and seeking a different life, Washington resigned his military commission. He returned to Mount Vernon, determined to become a successful planter and gentleman farmer. On January 6, 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 young children. Martha was intelligent, capable, and brought considerable wealth to the marriage. She was one of the richest women in Virginia. While it's debated whether it was a love match initially, letters suggest they developed genuine affection and partnership. Washington adopted Martha's children, John, Jackie, and Martha, Patsy, as his own. Though he never fathered biological children, he was devoted to his stepchildren. Tragically, Patsy died of epilepsy at age 17, devastating both George and Martha. For the next 15 years, Washington focused on making Mount Vernon prosperous. He was an innovative farmer, experimenting with crop rotation and new farming techniques. He grew wheat instead of tobacco, operated a fishery, and ran a whiskey distillery. Mount Vernon grew from 2,000 acres to over 8,000, becoming one of the most productive estates in Virginia. Washington was meticulous and hands-on, keeping detailed records of everything. He was up before dawn daily, riding around his farms, checking on operations. He also served in the Virginia House of Burgesses, the colonial legislature, gaining political experience. However, there was a dark reality beneath this prosperity. Mount Vernon operated through the forced labor of enslaved people. Washington enslaved over 300 people by the end of his life. His relationship with slavery was complex. He privately expressed moral discomfort with the institution, but he continued to profit from it throughout his life. During the 1760s and early 1770s, tensions between Britain and its American colonies escalated dramatically. The British government imposed new taxes, the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and Townshend Acts, to pay for the French and Indian War. The colonists, including Washington, protested taxation without representation. Washington initially hoped for reconciliation with Britain. He was loyal to the crown and had fought for British interests. But as British policies became more oppressive, his views shifted. The Intolerable Acts of 1774, which punished Massachusetts after the Boston Tea Party, pushed many moderates like Washington toward revolution. In 1774, Washington was chosen as a delegate to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. There, he met leaders from other colonies who shared his concerns. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. His military experience and imposing presence made him influential. When fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, everything changed. The Second Continental Congress convened, and the question arose, who should command the newly formed Continental Army besieging Boston? On June 15, 1775, Congress unanimously chose George Washington as commander-in-chief. At age 43, he was given an impossible task, creating an army from scratch to fight the world's most powerful military force. Washington accepted the position but refused to take a salary, asking only that Congress cover his expenses. This gesture of selfless service would define his public life. As he left Philadelphia to take command in Boston, he reportedly told Patrick Henry, "Remember, Mr. Henry, what I now tell you, from the day I enter upon the command of the American armies, I date my fall and the ruin of my reputation." Little did he know he was about to become a legend. When Washington arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in July 1775, he found not an army but a mob, 14,000 undisciplined militiamen with few supplies, little training, and no organization. Most had never seen real combat. Meanwhile, the British had professional soldiers, the world's most powerful navy, and resources from a global empire. Washington's first challenge was creating an actual army. He imposed discipline, established a command structure, and somehow kept the army together through expiring enlistments and constant shortages. His leadership style was dignified and reserved, but he commanded respect. The war began with mixed results. Washington successfully forced the British to evacuate Boston in March 1776 by fortifying Dorchester Heights with cannons. But then came a series of crushing defeats in New York. In late 1776, Washington's army was driven from New York City and across New Jersey in a desperate retreat. The Continental Army was collapsing, soldiers were deserting, enlistments were expiring, and the cause seemed lost. Then came one of the most famous moments in American history. On Christmas night, 1776, in freezing conditions, Washington led 2,400 men across the icy Delaware River. They marched 9 miles through a snowstorm to attack Hessian forces at Trenton, New Jersey. The surprise attack was a complete success. A week later, Washington won another victory at Princeton. These weren't major military victories, but they were psychological triumphs that saved the Revolution. Washington had shown that the Continental Army could fight and win. His crossing of the Delaware became an iconic symbol of American determination. The war continued for years with brutal campaigns. The winter of 1777–78 at Valley Forge tested Washington's army to the breaking point. Over 2,000 soldiers died from disease, exposure, and starvation. Washington stayed with his men, sharing their hardships. His presence and determination held the army together when it should ache. After the war ended, Washington did something extraordinary that shocked the world. Many expected him to seize power. He commanded the army, had enormous popularity, and some even suggested he become king. Instead, on December 23, 1783, Washington appeared before Congress in Annapolis and resigned his military commission. He returned power to civilian authority and went home to Mount Vernon. "I retire from the great theater of action," he wrote. This act was revolutionary. In an age of monarchs and military dictators, Washington voluntarily gave up power. He was compared to Cincinnatus, the Roman general who left his farm to save Rome, then returned to his plow rather than seize power. King George III reportedly said that if Washington stepped down, he will be the greatest man in the world. And he did step down, setting a precedent for civilian control of the military that remains fundamental to American democracy. Washington genuinely wanted to retire. He was 51, had spent 8 years at war, and longed for the quiet life at Mount Vernon with Martha. For a few years, he got his wish, but the new nation was failing. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government was too weak. States bickered, the economy struggled, and there was talk of the Union breaking apart. In 1787, a constitutional convention was called in Philadelphia to fix these problems. Every state wanted Washington to attend. His presence would give legitimacy to whatever resulted. Reluctantly, he agreed. When the convention convened in May 1787, Washington was unanimously elected its president. For 4 hot months, 55 delegates debated behind closed doors, creating a new framework for government. Washington rarely spoke during debates, but his presence kept discussions civil and his support for a strong federal government influenced the outcome. The resulting constitution created a federal system with 3 branches of government, including a single executive, a president. As the deleg. In early 1789, electoral college votes were counted. George Washington received all 69 electoral votes, the only president ever elected unanimously. On April 30, 1789, on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City, Washington took the oath of office as the first President of the United States. He was 57 years old and deeply uncomfortable with the role. "My movements to the chair of government will be accompanied by feelings not unlike those of a culprit who is going to the place of his execution," he wrote. Everything Washington did as president set precedents. He established the cabinet system, appointed the first Supreme Court justices, and signed the Bill of Rights into law. He navigated carefully between Alexander Hamilton's Federalists and Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, trying to stay above partisan politics. Washington's greatest challenge was keeping the fragile nation together. He dealt with the Whiskey Rebellion, asserting federal authority over states. He kept America neutral when war erupted between Britain and France, despite pressure from both sides. His farewell address warned against permanent alliances with foreign nations and the dangers of political parties, advice often cited even today. In 1792, Washington was unanimously re-elected, but he refused to serve a third term. This created the two-term tradition that lasted until Franklin D. Roosevelt and later became law. Once again, Washington voluntarily gave up power, reinforcing that presidents serve the people, not the other way around. He left office in March 1797, finally free to return to Mount Vernon permanently. Washington's final 2 years were spent at his beloved Mount Vernon. He managed his farms, entertained a constant stream of visitors, and enjoyed Martha's company. He remained interested in national affairs but stayed out of politics. In his final years, Washington struggled with the contradiction between his stated beliefs and his actions regarding slavery. In his will, he ordered that all 123 enslaved people he personally owned be freed upon Martha's death. He was the only slaveholding founding father to do so. However, this didn't free the majority of enslaved people at Mount Vernon, who belonged to Martha's estate. On December 12, 1799, Washington rode around his farms in snow, rain, and freezing temperatures for several hours. He developed a severe throat infection, likely acute epiglottitis. Despite treatment by 3 doctors, his condition worsened rapidly. On December 14, 1799, surrounded by Martha, his secretary Tobias Lear, and several enslaved servants, George Washington died at age 67. His last words were reportedly, "'Tis well." The nation mourned deeply. Congress declared a national day of mourning. Henry "Lighthorse Harry" Lee eulogized Washington as "first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen." George Washington's legacy is complex but undeniable. He led America to independence, presided over the Constitution's creation, and served as the first president, establishing precedents that shaped American democracy. His voluntary surrender of power, twice, was revolutionary and showed that Republican government could work. His character, integrity, and self-sacrifice made him a symbol of virtuous leadership. Yet he was also a slaveholder who profited from human bondage, a contradiction he never fully resolved in life. Understanding Washington means grappling with both his greatness and his flaws. Today, Washington's face is on the dollar bill and quarter, the Capitol bears his name, and his monument towers over Washington, D.C. He remains one of history's most consequential leaders, the man who could have been king but chose to be a citizen instead. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into George Washington's life, please hit that like button and subscribe for more historical content. Let me know in the comments what historical figure you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, keep learning.